The interesting thing is the class turnover was right at 5:30.
Okay.
So I think it will continue to be long.
So everybody had that.
I like the graphics on the cover. Hopefully the robots will stay in real estate and stay away from the passive positions.
Because the position is particularly safe.
I think so. And I've tried to position my whole career to avoid the robot.
Real estate and workers should get rid of the old contracts. They continue to tell them it won't work.
Well, I find even like our students here, so I mean, I have to have a textbook. I have to hold it, I have to highlight it. They don't even have textbooks.
No.
They want them all electronic and they can read it on their phone. I'm like, I need a book. So I call up the district and I was like, I don't care what you send the students, but you have to send me a book.
I have PPT. Yeah.
All right, yeah, Tim is here, now you can kick it off.
Good evening, everybody. Good food out there, and it's all free, sort of. Welcome to American University Real Estate Speakers Program. We've had this is our fourth speaker for the semester, and then we'll slow it down until next semester. But tonight we have Revathi Greenwood, who is the America's Head of Research at Cushman Wakefield. Revathi is in charge of a research platform within the Americas region. She provides leadership to hundreds of professionals who are focused on producing predictive, timely, and interpretive analysis of the latest real estate trends. A well-established thought leader, Revathi has 22 years experience in the commercial real estate industry, advising on all properties valued at more than $15 billion for various clients. She brings significant consulting and corporate finance experience, as well as strong global exposure across Europe and Asia. Revathi started her career in India and later moved to London, where she worked for 4 years at Citigroup's European Investment Banking Division. After working as a director of corporate finance at KPMG in London from 2003 to 2012, she moved to the United States, where she most recently held the position of America's Head of Investment at CBRE. We were very fortunate to lure her away from CBRE, and she now is with Cushman Wakefield. She has a Master's of Business Administration from the India Institute Management from Ahmedabad, and a Master's of Philosophy from the University of Cambridge. So with that, Revathi, would you please tell us the effect HQ2 has on the Washington real estate market and how the robots are going to replace the old-time brokers?
Thank you so much, Philip. I think this is a small enough group, so I might be able to do it without a mic. Can you all hear me in the last row? Okay. So like Philip said, my name is Revathi Greenwood. Now I know that's a slightly complicated name to pronounce, but my Starbucks name is Mary, and I'm happy to answer to that for any questions you might have today. So today, let's talk about robots and commercial real estate. So I'm going to structure the presentation into 4 bits. First, let's talk about technology as a demand driver, and obviously for DC, that means Amazon HQ2. Secondly, let's talk about technology as a long-term disruptor. And I'm talking about things like self-driving cars, e-scooters, prop tech, and all the stuff that's kind of changing our industry. I'm also happy to talk about my career in real estate and what I've kind of learned so far, and then we'll open it up to questions at the end, okay? So when I think of technology in the kind of the real estate space, it's a complicated thing to really get your mind around because there's so many moving parts to it. And the best way that I can understand it is to liken it to what the financial services sector was to the 1980s and to the 1990s. So on one hand, it killed jobs. On the other hand, it created jobs. It was a disruptor. And that's what technology is really doing. To the wider economy, but also to real estate, for the 2010s and the 2020s. And I'll keep coming back to this when we try and look at what are the effects of technology in the real estate sector. But first, like I said, let's talk about it as a demand driver, right? So let's start with Amazon HQ2, which is kind of the most exciting thing to happen to Crystal City, well, probably ever, right? And Amazon is going to be bringing about 25,000 office-using jobs to the area by 2030. But just to put this in context, Northern Virginia creates about 10,000 office-using jobs per year. So if you kind of average out these jobs, it's only about 20 to 25% jobs. So at once, it kind of looks like a muted response. So now let's look at the real estate impact of Amazon HQ2. What Amazon is going to do is that it's going to come into this kind of purplish area, which is going to be called National Landing. And it's going to take about 500,000 square foot of existing office and another 4 million square foot of additional development. But the thing is, we know what Amazon is going to take and we know what the real estate impact is going to be. So first of all, the vacancy rate in this submarket is about 20%. It's going to drop to 15% when the 500,000 is going to be taken by Amazon. And then when it takes the additional 4 million square foot, it's going to drop to about 11%. But by the time those buildings are not going to be in our statistics, so we don't really count that. What's also interesting is that anecdotally, there aren't enough transactions to kind of really say this, but anecdotally, and we've kind of mapped this about, rents in Crystal City have started going up as little as 50 cents to as much as $5. But remember, it's actually come off its peak from Q2 13 when we had sequestration, etc. So there's still a long way for it to climb, right? But the thing is, all this is kind of a limited impact, right? So we know that the jobs impact by itself is not that great. It's limited to Crystal City, and we can model out what the impact is on the submarket is. But things start getting much, much more interesting when we start looking at the multiplier effects of these things. Now, I'm not suggesting that DC is going to get overrun with an infestation of slightly sinister-looking bunnies. But really, what happens and what's interesting about these jobs is that it has a knock-on effect for creating wider jobs in the economy. So when you kind of look at the Amazon jobs in that context, each high-tech office worker, we think, will create 4 additional jobs over the next 10 years. So this is a very long-dated effect. And so what are those 4 additional jobs? So it could be a lawyer, it could be a teacher, it could be a nanny, it could be a healthcare worker. But basically, it supports a lot of other jobs. And when you get a non-high-tech office worker, the multiplier effect is 2 times. And so a smaller multiplier effect. So of the 25,000 jobs that Amazon is bringing to DC, we think they are split roughly equally between the high-tech jobs and the non-high-tech jobs. So which means that if you kind of multiply them with the multipliers, over the long term, there's something like 80,000 jobs that are going to be created, but over the next 20 years, because you remember, after each job is created, it takes 10 years for the full effect of that job to be created. So when we try and kind of bring that back to 2030, because 20 years is almost too long a time frame to kind of really analyze, right? So let's bring it back to 2030. So that's about 60,000 jobs in the DC metro region. And we think it's about 25,000 office-using jobs. Now, the reason I'm looking at office-using jobs is that you can translate that very directly into office demand. And that's one of the main things that we're kind of tracking here. So out of those 25,000 jobs, we think about 85% of that will be created in Northern Virginia. Now, the interesting thing about the DC metro region, and you guys are up here in AU, is actually DC's center of gravity has been moving towards Northern Virginia in terms of job creation. I know all the exciting stuff happens this side of town, but in terms of job creation, a lot of the jobs are created in Northern Virginia. And we think, and it's about like 50 to 75%, depending on what time frame you look at. So we think that with Amazon, most of those jobs, obviously because it's located in Crystal City, it's going to be created in that cluster. So that's about 22,000 office using jobs. So you take those jobs and you multiply it by 165 square foot, which is kind of the average space we take into account over this entire time free period, taking into account co-working, densification, etc. You kind of land up with 3.6 million square foot of demand, of office using demand in Northern Virginia. Now that's a lot of demand, right? But remember, this is up until 2030. So this is the kind of graph to kind of show you how the demand stacks up. So as you can see, most of the Amazon jobs that are being created are actually back-ended. Most of the jobs are actually happening kind of 2024, 2029, 2030. So that's when a lot of this effect is very, very back-ended. So that's why we're not going to see much effect right now, 2019, 2020. But if you're a real estate investor, this kind of time frame matters, right? Because you typically have a 5 to 7 to 10 year time horizon. And therefore, these metrics can really start making a difference. So remember the 3.6 million square foot, that's a big number, right? But let's try and put this in context. Northern Virginia's average net absorption, which is a metric of demand that we track, over the last 5 years has been roughly 400,000. You average out the 3.6 million by 12 years, you get to about 300,000 extra demand that wasn't there in Northern Virginia. So that's about 73%. So that is what Amazon is going to do to the region. It's going to increase demand by another 73% on average over the next 10 years. So again, a pretty big number. And then if you kind of widen it out to the DC metro region, it becomes even bigger. It's 4.2 million by 2030. And then if you're going to say, let's look out at the full 20 years of the demand, it's even bigger. It's 7.7 million square foot. So the thing is, our model, which kind of cranks out all these numbers, makes one fundamental assumption, which is ceteris paribus. Now, ceteris paribus is just a fancy Latin term for everything else remaining constant. And what are the chances of that happening, right? That never happens, because while technology is a demand driver, it's also going to be a huge disruptor during this period. Now, what's interesting about real estate is that you guys probably know this better than I do, how various industries have been disrupted by technology. But actually, when you think about it, real estate as an industry hasn't really been disrupted by technology. Yes, we use emails, yes, we use fancy laptops, etc. But fundamentally, the way people do business in real estate hasn't changed, and there's a reason for it. Buildings are built to last really long, 10, 15, 20 years, and nobody's going to change the structure of a building or the structure of anything if it isn't a long-lasting change. And therefore, real estate is very resistant to change. But change is on the horizon because there are a lot of changes right now that are changing consumer behavior. And there are things like blockchain and Bitcoin, auto-related stuff, space usage-related stuff. So lots of things that people are actually tracking that we think will actually disrupt this industry big time over the next 10 to 20 years. So when I think of kind of technology and real estate, there's lots of technologies that are out there, right? So what are the things that really matter before you can answer the question, is this going to affect real estate? And for me, there are almost 3 preconditions that need to be met. The first thing is that, does that technology meet the basic hurdle of safety or acceptance? So for example, the self-driving technology, right? It still isn't that safe. You're probably better off driving a car on your own than getting into an Uber that's manned by. People are still concerned about that. The second thing is it needs to converge with other technologies. So if you've got one self-driving car on its own on the street, that isn't really going to change the way people use real estate. It needs to be connected in fleets. It needs to be interconnected with other technology. You need 5G networks to come into play before all of this stuff can happen. And finally, it needs to be scalable. So it has to be widespread before, again, it actually restructures how cities are organized. So these are almost kind of the three preconditions before you can answer a question, is this technology going to really make a difference to us? So to kind of test this, let's look at the effect of kind of mobile phones. And you guys are too young to remember this, but those of you who are my age, you'll remember this picture of Gorbachev and the Nokia in 1987. And around this time, AT&T looked at this technology and they hired McKinsey. And they asked them this question. They said, how big is this technology going to be by the end of the century, by the year 2000? So McKinsey looked at this and they said, there are a lot of problems with this technology. It's a great technology, but there are a lot of problems with it. First of all, it's really too heavy to carry around. Your shoulder really aches. Secondly, it's terribly expensive. Battery life is a problem. You have one phone call and you can't, and battery dies. And coverage is a problem. You have to be, you move five minutes this way, 5 minutes that way, and you don't get any cell phone coverage. And they said, well, they probably thought it would be about 1 million phones by the turn of the century. They were off by about 99 million. Because there were about 100 million phones, in this space. So what happened with mobile technologies, it really became widespread because there was a lot of other technological hurdles that were solved. But even then, it didn't become truly disruptive until your phone got connected to the internet. And then what happened is, even though your phone is still pretty expensive, actually when you look at the technologies it replaces your GPS system, it replaces your iPod, it replaces your alarm clock, it replaces your watch. Actually, it's cost effective enough to become scalable. So that's what we are talking about over here. Think of it in those terms in terms of scalability. So when you look at technologies, Gartner has come up with this thing called a hype cycle curve that all technologies go through. And so you kind of start off, each technology starts off with a technology trigger when the technology is invented, right? And everybody gets very excited about it. So it goes into this peak of kind of inflated expectations. And that's where we are right now with some of these technologies, AVs, drones, we're all really excited about it. Then something happens, like with the AV cars, there was an accident with the Uber, and then all the negative media starts, and then you go into the trough of kind of disillusionment. And you're like, no, this is never going to happen. Then what happens is that, when expectations are scaled down, actually you start getting second generation products coming up. And at this point in time, other technologies also start going up. So you start going into what they call kind of the plateau of enlightenment. And finally, you kind of get to widespread adoption, which is kind of 20 to 30%. And then when you actually sort of plot all the technologies on this hype cycle, you can see that the technology that actually people are most excited about, and I'm most excited about, is things like ride sharing. Stuff that gets all the media attention, like AVs and drones, are actually quite a way behind. So I've talked to you guys long enough. You guys are students, so you should be familiar with quizzes. So let's have a little bit of a quiz. And I've actually got some Cushman swag for the right answer. So let me bring that along. So what do you think the median age of the US population is? So which is the age group in the US population that has got the largest number of people? How many people think it's 26 years old? How many people think it's 36 years old? How many people think it's 56 years old? And how many people think it's 66? Nobody? Okay, so the right answer in this case is actually, hold on, let me just get this out of the back. It's 19. Figure out what it is. It's actually 26 years old. So when you kind of look at the barbell graph of the US population, there's like a big spike when it comes to millennials and a big spike when it comes to boomers. Now, why does this matter when we're talking about technology? Because age matters, right, when you're talking about technology adoption. So there was a British author called Douglas Adams, And he wrote a great book called Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. If you haven't read it, I strongly recommend it. And he basically said that people's attitudes to technology depends on when they were born. So if there's technology that comes into place from, when you're 0 years old to, maybe to you're 20 years old, that's just natural. You've grown up with it. It's the way things are. You're used to it. Anything that is invented by the time you're 20 years old to maybe you're about 40 years old, well, that's kind of a testament to how exciting and innovative your generation is, and you tend to kind of embrace it with open arms. And anything that's invented after you're 40 years old, well, that's just wrong. And you just avoid it at all costs. But here's the thing. So the median age of the US population, like I said, is about 26. So this group and all of you are the ones who are embracing technology. And so your attitudes to technology is very, very different from the people who are currently in charge, who are, by and large, kind of frightened of it. So let's look at the other next question, productivity, and let's have a true or false for this one. Which of these are the craziest non-work activities that workers have actually done on the job? Some of them are true, some of them are false. A person decorated a cubicle with chains of paper clips. True or false? True. Yeah, you're right. Somebody actually did this. Watching YouTube videos of people cramming marshmallows in their mouths. True or false? Brought in a kitten she found outside and tried to keep it quiet within a large purse. True or false? Absolutely. So I think I'm going to have to kind of distribute some of these as well. These are all true examples of things that people have done on the job. And again, oops. It's gone on a long way. How did this happen? Sorry about this. This is technology fail. Okay, great. So I think there are a lot of true answers over here. So let's get some. So productivity. So this is a big problem that we are having. With technology, everybody assumes that productivity is on the rise. But the truth is that productivity has been actually being flattened in the US for since this cycle. And we don't really know why that is. And so we're calling it kind of a technology productivity conundrum, because people don't really understand why this is. Some of it, might be just a measurement issue, that because we don't really know how to measure productivity. So for example, the Google executives say that their biggest contribution to American productivity is YouTube, because a hairdresser who works on a salon by day can go on to YouTube by night and give kind of, hair cutting tutorials, and you can monetize that. But this is the thing, you need about 2 million YouTube, fans or subscribers to get an income of $20,000 per year. So when you actually look at the math, it's actually very, very hard to kind of reach that metric. You can earn that $20,000 in much easier ways. The second thing is that, it might just be a timing issue, because it took about 70 years for the gains of the Industrial Revolution to kind of really transfer into productivity. And right now we're only 20 years into the tech revolution, and most of the gains have happened in the last 10 years. So that might be some of the problem. And the other thing is that what is happening is that on one hand, technology is kind of killing productivity in the workforce, because it's very distracting, right? When you're working on your laptop, an email comes in, you can jump on Twitter, you can jump on something else. And when they've done surveys of employers, on average, they think that people are working about 5 hours a day. And so that's the bad news. The good news is that from an employer's perspective, you're always connected. You're never off work, right? So right now, when I email anybody, the expectation pretty much is, whether you're on holiday, whether you're on a vacation, is that you respond immediately. So those are some of the interesting things that we are seeing. And so when you hear, like, the thing about technology is that it's supposed to improve productivity, the fact is it isn't as yet, and we don't really know why. So now let's go and talk about kind of technology as a disruptor. And I'm going to start with self-driving cars. Why self-driving cars? Well, it's a subject very, very close to my heart. I somehow managed to fail 5 driving tests. So I'm very, very personally very invested in this technology. Now, when you kind of look at self-driving cars, it kind of gets all the hype that there is right now, actually. But like I said, the technology that actually is more widely adopted is ride sharing. Ride sharing has already hit 21% adoption in most of the major metros. And why is this interesting? This is interesting because it's starting to change consumer behavior. And whenever you hear the word that something is changing consumer behavior, it should send your spidey senses tingling because that affects how people use real estate. So one of the things that ride sharing is doing is that people are using public transit less. So instead of jumping on the metro, they jump into an Uber. And one of the things we take for granted in real estate is that buildings that are close to transit node, that's close to metro, have a real estate premium. You know, they sell faster, they lease faster, they've got higher rents. But if that's going to be eroded over the long term, does it erode transit-oriented development premiums? Most people are using it to avoid parking, and parking is a big source of income right now. So what does it do to parking going forward and parking technology? Now, ride sharing is also kind of driving the development of self-driving vehicles, because what's interesting is that the biggest cost of your Uber trip, 50% of that cost is the cost of the driver. So if you get rid of the driver, that's a path to profitability. So a lot of those companies are sort of investing in self-driving vehicles, and that's kind of driving this. The other thing that's also happening is that because of all the pollution and congestion that ride-sharing apps are creating, there's a lot of pressure on them to actually, develop environmentally friendly technology, and that in turn is driving electric vehicles. And together, this market is all being disrupted by kind of e-scooters. So that's kind of a new twist on kind of an old technology, and that in itself is disrupting the ride-sharing market. Because what's interesting is that about nearly half the trips that you do in an Uber in the metro area are actually 3 miles or less. Now this was so surprising. I was really surprised when I heard this. And so I started tracking my Uber activity, and this is right. I kind of use it to go to my kids' piano class, which is kind of a couple of blocks away. That is just beyond the walking distance, and an Uber kind of hits that sweet spot. And what's interesting is that an e-scooter is actually cheaper than an Uber for that kind of trip, and therefore this is kind of disrupting this market as well. So there's lots of kind of interesting interplays and how people are using this space. So this kind of market is kind of anticipated to get to about 555 billion by 2035. So big markets. And what that means is this is going to kind of really change how real estate is used. Now, when you kind of look at mobility, you have to kind of answer the question, what is going to be the impact across various timeframes? So in the near term, which is kind of now to 10 years, let's say there's patchy adoption of self-driving cars. There's some kind of self-driving capability, but you really still have to pay attention to the car. And ride-sharing and micromobility have really taken off. So at this point in time, what's really interesting is the car itself is going to change. Today, about 90% of the value of your car is in its hardware, and only 10% it's going to be in the software. But within the next 10 years, 60% of a car's value is going to come from its hardware and its software, from the software and its content. So you're going to be streaming content into it, you're going to have kind of computer programs, etc., and the hardware is going to be less important. So basically, what does this mean? There's going to be a lot of demand from all of these sectors: data centers, cybersecurity, media, entertainment, mobility companies. And they're all going to want commercial real estate. And therefore, that's going to drive, those are going to be the demand drivers for commercial real estate over the next 10 years. And we've kind of tracked this, and we think that Bay Area companies in San Francisco, they already occupy about 6 million square foot. So that's a large amount of space. But you might be thinking, okay, that's in San Francisco. Why is she talking about it in terms of kind of DC real estate? Well, it's because San Francisco is so expensive right now. Sorry, I think I seem to have missed a slide. But basically what's happening is that because San Francisco is so expensive right now, that there's a lot of demand that's actually moving from the Bay Area into the DC area. And we tracked about 1 million square foot that's actually coming into DC because San Francisco is too expensive. So there's a huge spill-on effect for all of these. And DC, luckily, because of Amazon, because a lot of region, is being seen as a tech hub. So in the midterm, 10 to 15 years, well, we think there's going to be partial self-driving capability. So you can kind of sit in your car, you don't have to pay attention to it anymore. You can kind of work, do other things. And what this really does is it frees up commute times. Now, commute times are kind of an interesting statistic, right? Because people always kind of underestimate how soul-numbing a long commute is. And this has actually been studied by an Italian physicist called Alberto Marchetti, and this is called Marchetti's constant. And what he found was that no matter kind of which city you look at, across all urban areas, people have a 30-minute one-way pain point for a commute. So if your commute on average is longer than 30 minutes one way, then that's your pain point. You start kind of trying to change where you live, where you work, you start doing other things to try and change that. And the way a city actually develops is actually within this kind of 30-minute commute pattern. So the question is, I think when you have this kind of partial self-driving capability and it increases the commute, your commute becomes more tolerable in some senses, then it kind of, maybe the urban sprawl increases because you're more tolerant to kind of commuting longer distances. And the city itself might actually move out a little bit. And in the long term, 15 years plus, I mean, by this time, we are saying, EV fleets, we are talking about, electrically operated vehicles. If all this materializes, basically the complete cities are going to be remapped. So it's really very hard to predict what's going to happen at this point in time. But one thing we can say for sure is that by this point in time, the parking is really going to be affected big time because you just wouldn't park your car in a city center anymore. They probably don't even need to be parked. They probably be stacked in kind of robotic stacks. And we anticipate that about 34% of existing parking in the US is possibly at risk by this point in time if all of this materializes. So what this happens is by this time, it really frees up a lot of space because we have, the roads and cities in America are so built around this existing model. And once it kind of changes, there's a lot of, so really the question is how do you make your space flexible, especially if you've got parking, et cetera, to cope with this. So let's do another lightning round and let's talk about other technologies. Let's talk about blockchain and Bitcoin because that's another big technology that everyone's tracking and that's going to disrupt commercial real estate. So how much energy do you think one mining transaction on the Bitcoin network takes? How many people think it's the energy to power 8 US households for a day? Can we have a show of hands? How many people think it's the energy to power up a mobile phone? How many people think it's the energy to fly a rocket ship to the moon? So the answer is 8 US households. Thank you. But here's the point. Blockchain and Bitcoin mining is actually very, very energy intensive. And actually, if you're going to start mining all the Bitcoins to meet the demand, it's going to use up all the world's energy by 2020. So basically, when you talk about other technologies, you need kind of the energy sources in the world to keep up because otherwise this technology is going to be limited. But this technology is interesting, right? Because the other thing is kind of processing power. Now, the processing power of just even the most sophisticated computer right now is that of a rat's brain. And people kind of look at this graph and say, oh, well, from the rat's brain to the human brain, it isn't much of a jump. So actually, this processing power is going to increase rather rapidly, and we're all going to be without jobs and we can be completely replaced. But the interesting thing is, this is where the law of diminishing marginal return starts to apply. The incremental leap and the energy it takes to move from the rat's brain to the human brain is actually so much that personally, I think this is going to take a long time to happen. And I could be wrong about it, but that's my view. So when we get into kind of blockchain fundamentals, what blockchain basically does from a real estate perspective is 3 things. It keeps records, it transfers value, and it enables smart contracts to happen. And because of that, despite all the problems and its adoption in real estate is really patchy, provided we can solve the kind of the energy and the computational issues, it has a lot of application in kind of, getting rid of the middlemen, making transactions more efficient, less fees, keeping track of the information, because a lot of title records, a lot of kind of public database information is so archaic that this could actually be a huge game changer for it. And finally, let's talk about prop tech. So in terms of prop tech, these are when we're talking about smart buildings, and this is something that's happening right now, and we're seeing the impact of that very, very clearly, just specifically in our business. We are a CRE services firm. But when I kind of think about property technology, I kind of, in a building, I kind of put it into three buckets. The first bucket is how it kind of increases energy and sustainability, because that's a huge cost of any building that you're sitting in, right? The HVAC costs are a huge cost. And anything that can reduce the HVAC cost is a big source of this. So now you've got apps that actually monitor the HVAC and sensors that kind of figure out when somebody walks into a room and somebody's not in a room, and you can adjust the heating and lighting accordingly. Asset life, and this is what is called digital twin technology. A lot of machines are kind of very, very expensive to maintain. You don't really know when they're going to go bust, and it's very, very expensive when it goes bust and you don't know when it is. Now you can have sensors on very expensive machines that kind of monitor the technology and kind of tell you in real time when is actually failing, etc. And so there's a lot of preventative maintenance that you can do around that. And finally, for the occupant experience, there are a lot of apps right now that landlords are offering their tenants. So if you're sitting in a room and it's too hot, you can go into like a crowdsourcing app and say it's too hot, change the temperature, and that information gets relayed back. And so ideally, in the next 5 to 10 years, when you walk into an office building, the sensors in the office building kind of figure out whether you're an authorized entry person or not. Will let you in. The moment you come in, your coffee, your chai latte or your frappuccino, whatever coffee you want will already be ordered because it's in the system and it'll be there ready for you to pick up. You walk into your desk, you may or may not have a dedicated desk, you might have a hot desk. If you've asked for a meeting room and there's no meeting room available for your meeting, or it's something that's too large, the entire system kind of reorganizes it and kind of gives you the right meeting room. And then you can also kind of tailor make the temperature, everything in your kind of environment to kind of suit your space. And these are all things that people are kind of really tracking, because the biggest problem that companies have right now is finding talent. And they're all competing for good talent, and they want talent to stay. And obviously, salary matters, all of those things matters, but real estate also matters. And you have kind of a nice environment which gives you a lot of kind of perks, and it's just a nice place to work. That matters. People are focusing on this. And finally, let's talk about online shopping. How many people kind of do 20% of their shopping online? How many people do 50% of their shopping online? How many people do all of their shopping online? Is there anybody doing their online shopping right now? So here's the thing, right? Online shopping is the other big change that technology has done to kind of commercial real estate, and this is most obviously in retail and industrial. Retail is now kind of very much the underdog of the commercial real estate sector, while industrial, especially last mile logistics, is really very much the darling of the commercial real estate sector. And online shopping penetration has kind of, this has kind of gone up to about 12%. And obviously, this includes things like cars, etc., and washing machines that you kind of really still don't buy online. You still kind of go to the dealer shop and look at it, etc. And as you kind of take this technology over, then this is again a huge game changer in the commercial real estate space. So when we kind of stand back and look at technology and kind of look at it in the future, the fact is that we are always kind of very, very nervous about it. The question that I often get asked is that, is a robot going to replace me, which is hence the title of the talk. And the reason why the future always looks kind of dystopian, and here you've got Planet of the Apes, Hunger Games, humans always come to a sticky end in all these science fiction depictions, right? And the real problem is that we are all very, very nervous. It's a very primal fear of being replaced. And that's really the question. As artificial intelligence becomes more and more clever, it's already at the level of a rat. When it starts getting to the level of a human being, are we just not going to be needed anymore? Are we going to be taken over by robots? So here's the actual stats. The first thing is that when you kind of look at history, each wave of technology has not actually killed jobs. It's actually added more jobs. Because there are jobs that we do right now that you couldn't have imagined even 10 years ago. For example, all those people developing those games on apps, right? It doesn't exist. And so as the world evolves, you've got new jobs that are created. And on the other hand, ATM, bank tellers. Bank tellers were completely replaced by ATM machines. So if you were a bank teller, yes, you've lost your jobs. But society as a whole has created other jobs. But the problem over here right now is artificial intelligence, because till now what jobs that were really replaced were kind of, process jobs. And when you have a job and a robot that can actually do the thinking for you, like machine learning, computers can do, that's when the question starts becoming sort of more pertinent. And this is true, right? So when they actually modeled it, the OECD said that 14% of jobs are going to be lost globally over the next decade from automation. And when you kind of think of job losses and technology, people always think, like retail workers. There are going to be no retail workers anymore. But that's not how you actually need to think about it. There are some elements of your job that technology will take over, but jobs that need high EQ, IQ, and social emotional intelligence will still be needed. So you can probably hand over the more routine kind of stuff to a robot, but kind of keep the more value-added kind of stuff for yourself and for humans. And also it depends what kind of jobs. The more kind of commodity, like industrial jobs, a lot of them are going to be replaced. A lot of the management jobs and computer engineering, etc., are still going to be here to stay for at least the distant future. And also, I think the effect will vary by cities. Some cities are kind of better placed to kind of deal with disruption than others. In general, sort of the larger cities are really kind of well placed to deal with a lot of technology disruption, because in larger cities, they're also kind of innovation centers. So while you have technology disruption that happens in one place, you've also got a lot of innovation that creates more jobs. And therefore, those are kind of the places to be in, as the technology revolution happens. And therefore, that also drives commercial real estate. So I've kind of thrown a lot at you, which is kind of unfair on a Wednesday evening. But, so some of you would have seen this meme of this dress that kind of circulated on the internet some time ago. So what color is this dress? How many people see a blue and black dress?
It is blue.
It's white.
How many people see a white and gold dress? Does anybody else see any other combinations of colors? Is there anyone who doesn't see a dress at all? So the dress is actually blue and black, okay, the original dress. But what you see on this kind of depends on a couple of things. It depends on how light is falling on the screen from where you're sitting. It depends on how your brain chemistry works. And so this is the thing with stats, right? I've kind of thrown a lot of stats and kind of figures at you. But what you kind of take away out of this, especially when you're talking about something as futuristic as technology, it very much depends upon your cognitive biases. So you might take these stats and come to completely different conclusions, but what I'm going to present over here is my takeaways based on what I see. So what does all this technology implications mean for real estate as a business, right? So first of all, focus on some things that absolutely will not change, right? The things that won't change is that technology is driving demand. Real estate still needs talent, and talent is what is dictating what a lot of companies are going to look for when they're making their decisions and hiring. Innovation centers, building amenities and efficiency, all of these things will not go away, no matter what happens to the technology space. However, there are some things that are going to change, and let's change those things that we can. When you kind of think real estate needs to be flexible, that's an easy thing to say, right? One of the standard answers for parking is that, make parking flexible. Increase the ceiling height of a parking garage so that you can kind of convert it into office space or last mile storage or something like that. Instead of having slanted floor plates, make the floor plates flat so that you can use it for some purposes. The problem with that is all this is expensive. It's not easy. I mean, it comes at a huge cost to kind of raise the ceiling height of a parking garage. And the problem is you don't even know whether it'll come to pass. Right? I mean, yes, I'm saying that 34% of the parking is not going to be used by the year 2020, but frankly, I won't be around then. And if you've made that bet, you don't know. So the problem is, do you pay that option premium for flexibility? And that's where kind of real estate advice really comes in. You need to look at every case on its merits and say, do I pay this, yes or no? And in order to figure that out, whether you need to pay the option premium, data is really the thing that actually makes a huge difference to everybody. Building level data, wayfinding, survey tenants, track competition, collect data, because that's what gives you the information on what's actually happening in the space, and it cuts out all the theorizing, right? I mean, what I'm saying is, just one opinion, but you can't actually argue with the data. And I'm sort of kind of slightly evangelical about it. So that's kind of the real estate section about it. And when I kind of talked to Philip about it, he also kind of said to talk about general kind of career trips. So I didn't want to go over kind of all the usual career advice, because I know you've had a lot of great speakers and you've probably got a lot of career advice. I just want to give away some tips based on what I've seen, in my work and working with sort of millennials in my company. And I think the first thing is that, and you probably know all this, but, don't underestimate the fact that you guys come with a unique skill set, which is you understand the technology world a lot better than a lot of people in companies currently do. And this is a key point, because right now, when historically, when I entered to the workforce, the power structure was very, very tipped, it was balanced away from me, because I was a newbie, I didn't know anything, I was there to learn. But right now what's happening is that I had this case where there was this young lady from our San Francisco office. She basically took our data and she basically kind of created a really cool website out of this just on her own initiative. She just did this on her own. And it was so fabulously cool that we are now deciding, we're trying to see whether we can roll it out to the rest of the company, because it was just so cool. And she did it completely on her own merit. And so, for the first time, I think the power equation between people who enter into the workforce and people who are already in is kind of rebalanced, simply because of this kind of technology, this understanding of technology, which is kind of reshaping things that we frankly don't have. The second thing is that, don't be afraid to ask basic questions. I think when you come into the workforce, again, a lot of times you're sitting in a meeting and you just want to ask questions, you're scared to. I think subject to some caveats. The first of all is, is this a question that you can Google and find the answer on Google? If so, do it. Secondly, is this a question that you can work out for yourself? If you can't, ask the question. When you come into a workforce, everybody is always very, very happy to answer questions. And I think you can kind of do this up to about 5 to 10 years into your career. But after about 10 years, you guys should know your stuff. At that point in time, you shouldn't be asking the basic questions. In my view, you should be answering them. But then here's the other thing. Then when you become really senior, at that point in time, you can start asking the basic questions again. Because at that point in time, you're probably adding in a value that when you go into places where you don't know what's going on, you're trying to learn, you can actually ask that. So it's almost kind of like a bell curve, So you can ask a lot of questions at the beginning. At the middle, try and be seen as an expert. I think that'll really enhance your reputations. And then when you're senior enough, you can go back and ask the questions. Communication is key. This is an obvious point. We're working with humans still. So, write properly, learn how to present, that's worth your while. But communication also includes basic things like replying to emails, keeping people in the loop, picking up the phone. Just make sure that you communicate, because that actually is still a very, very vital part of, of the office culture, no matter what. Office dynamics, what I mean by here is office politics. I've got no advice on office politics. If you guys have any advice, you can tell me. But here's the thing, that when you come into an office, right? When you come into a department, there'll be an organizational chart. Print out that organizational chart and then figure out what the real organizational chart is. Because between the people who actually sit in your department, there'll be people who kind of talk to each other, there'll be people who are more influential than others. Try and map that out. Because once you understand those dynamics, it's kind of much easier to kind of navigate through your office or your department or whatever that is. Network, this is an obvious one. Everybody always says network. And if you're a good networker, then, that's fine. I wasn't. And therefore, the best advice that I got was given to me by one of my bosses. And he said, networking really doesn't mean going out to these endless parties and kind of having canapes and trying to, talk to CEO of XYZ company. He said, keep in touch with your peers. Because 15 to 20 years from now, they'll be the influencers in other corporates. And that's what I find is happening now. I was a worst networker, but I kept in touch with the people in my MBA class, from Cambridge, etc. And a lot of them are now actually very, very senior positions, and we can all call each other up, and we are friends more than anything else. So there's a real relationship, and you get real value from that. And finally, wisdom and mistakes. Wisdom is something that's really, really hard to come by. And the best way is to kind of learn it from the mistakes from others. But sometimes you can only learn from your own mistakes. And so you will make mistakes and you will beat yourself up. There's nothing that can be done about that. That's just kind of the way these things work. But at the end of the day, be confident that you'll have a lot of wisdom and experience to draw from, which is kind of really valuable. And finally, keep learning. I mean, this is kind of, just a statement of the obvious, but especially in this world, how this world kind of is different from the world that I grew up from is no longer got a centralized authority, right? Like even in your business school, your professors are no longer the only source of truth. You've got other sources of truth as well, and in some cases, you know more than them. And the next big idea comes up from some random corner of the world. So more than ever, be open to everything that the world holds open for you in terms of learning, because I think it's really, really very exciting time. On that note, I'm happy to take any questions or talk about anything else you guys want to talk about.
I'll kick off with a question.
Sure.
You mentioned that because of the technology, that production is flat, and people don't know why. Okay. I think one of the reasons why is that the 26-year-olds and the younger folks today can solve a problem quicker with the new technology, which gives them more time to Google the internet to see what's for sale. And I mean, I see it all day long, and not just the young people. I see it among the more senior people. Same thing. You can get everything done. It takes you 20 minutes. It used to take an hour. Or what am I going to do with the next 40 minutes?
Yeah.
I don't need to do anymore because I've
Yeah.
already answered the question.
Yeah.
So I think that may be a reason.
Yeah, I think there could be a lot
Yeah.
of reasons. I mean, I think so. This is an interesting discussion, right? Because there's efficiency and there's productivity.
Right.
So a lot of what, and I think it's easy to kind of conflate the two. I think technology is relating in efficiencies, so it lets you do the same work faster. But productivity is when you kind of use that extra time to produce something new, and I think that's what isn't happening. Yes, people are
Right.
getting more efficient,
Right.
but with that spare time, they are not necessarily translating it into increased output.
So maybe
So-
the senior people should make the problems more complicated.
Oh, well, exactly, yeah,
Right?
absolutely.
That you can't do it.
Yeah.
Wait a minute. The other thing that you said, which I just want to reiterate, because every speaker we've had has said the exact same thing. In order to succeed in your profession, network. I mean,
Absolutely.
that's a common thread throughout each one of our talks, and those that have been here for the talks can attest to that.
Yeah.
So I have other
Absolutely.
questions, but I want these young folks to come up with some
Yeah,
questions.
absolutely, couldn't agree more. Any other questions or thoughts?
I have a question about the graph that we're saying, the rat brain and the human brain. I didn't get that.
So this is basically trying to answer the question, what is the processing power of the human brain? So it's not really kind of the intelligence level, but how quickly can you process it? So think of it as a CPU, as how fast a computer can process something. So the processing power of the most sophisticated computer on the world today is as sophisticated as that of a rat's brain. And when you talk about a rat's brain, rats are actually very, very clever. So, and that's what people kind of harness on, that actually rats can kind of navigate through things, they're kind of social animals. They actually have a lot of sort of very sophisticated and very intelligent behavior. And therefore there's an intelligence attribution that is done to that. And when you look at that graph, right, the kind of distance between a rat's brain to a human brain is so small. And so people kind of make the assumption, well, from the rat's brain to a human brain, it's just a matter of what, like 10, 15 years, it should happen in our lifetime. And that's what's kind of fueling a lot of this debate.
How much more role do you see automation playing in the construction industry in the coming years, like in the face of rising labor costs?
So we are actually doing a paper on this right now. So there's a firm that actually has got a robot it's called a Tybot, and it actually helps you kind of build bridges. And basically that's what they're trying to kind of see, whether you can kind of safety, efficiency, costs of kind of construction workers, whether you can replace that. So that's a huge part of it. And so I think you're starting to see that technology come through. I don't really have the quantification of how much it's kind of translating to savings, because Tybot is really such a new technology. I mean, roughly kind of, we're trying to get some break-even stats. I don't have that. But I think that's one area where you're going to see, a huge amount of benefits, simply because, replacing that labor cost, which is kind of the biggest cost of constructing a building, is actually your labor cost. And that is going to be very, very efficient in that. But I can, that paper is going to come out next month, and so we hopefully have some more stats on that, and I'll send it to Philip to kind of let you guys have a look at that.
I have a question. So when do you think that the artificial intelligence will finally replace all the traditional ways that people find things or doing some things in a traditional way? Because I know that in America, like you have mentioned before, the median age is 26, right?
Yes.
But in China, I think because from my my circle of friends, some people are very old and they don't like to use the new technology, or they don't even know how to do that. So based on this situation, I wonder, when do you think all the intelligent things will finally replace the traditional ways?
So I think it's, in some industries it's happening more than others. So for example, and this is where this thing about convergence comes up, right? So for example, in the healthcare industry, I read that actually, people right now, you can use robotics and to do surgery, but the doctor actually has to be physically in the room with the patient to kind of manually control the robotic machine. But when 5G technology comes into play, you could actually, the doctor can be, say, in New York, and actually an operation can be done in DC with robotics. So actually, I think once you have it's not so much, that the artificial intelligence alone, it's how far, say, other technologies sort of converge that kind of make all this possible. And I mean, I think, when you're talking about artificial intelligence kind of really kind of meeting what they call the Turing test of intelligence, that is, you can't make out the difference between whether you're talking to a robot or whether to a computer. I think that's really a long way off. There's a guy called Ray Kurzweiler who kind of sort of opines on this, right? And he kind of says, that's kind of post the next 10, 15 years. But right now, what, the real changes that you're talking about right now is kind of the Internet of Things. The fact that, you have, you can have like retinal implants, and the fact that you can have hearing devices, and the fact that, instead of sort of going out to shop, you're kind of going to sit at home, order online, a drone might bring it to you. So those are, I think, the technologies that people really see kind of taking off in the next 10 years. I think through artificial intelligence, my own view is that it's probably some time off. But I don't know, maybe other people have different thoughts on this.
Great. Any other questions? Doesn't cost anything to ask all you want.
Sorry.
So regarding the effect of e-commerce on retail, do you see that plateauing now? Like, do you see niche retail and supermarkets are not going to be affected so much by e-commerce?
So I think, retail is interesting, right? When you kind of look at retail, what's interesting about US retail is the US was over-retailed in the first place. It had no business building so much retail. If you look at the per capita kind of retail stats in the US versus other countries, it's kind of 3 times that of the UK. So a lot of it is just, retail is all about kind of class. So when you're talking about lower class malls, those are going to probably go out. I mean, those have been going out of business. There's really nothing that you can do about them. The A-class malls, which are kind of the A-class retail, which are located well, people still go to those. It's really the B-class that's really kind of, the question mark, whether you can save them versus not. But then again, when you think of retail, people only kind of think of shopping, right? But actually, we're all human, right? So there was an interesting kind of Reddit question, and you guys must be on Reddit. And this is a question that kind of said, if somebody from the 1950s came to you today, time traveled, what would be the thing that you could tell them that would kind of astound them the most? And the answer that got it upvoted the most was a guy who said, Well, I've got this thing in my pocket, it's talking about a phone, that gives me access to the sum total of human knowledge. And I use it to look up pictures of cats and get into arguments with strangers. And this is so true, right? Because when we talk about technology, technology is one aspect, but the lowest common denominator is human nature. And human nature is that people still want to go to malls and experience things. My daughter wants to go to the mall with her friends and kind of hang out. You know, she wants to walk around, she wants to kind of, be seen, she still wants a human connection. And that's what retailers are doing right now. They're moving much more into kind of experiential retail. So, services, entertainment, and that's what a lot of retailers kind of morphing into. And the other thing that's also happening is that a lot of retailers, the other technology is also happening is cashless stores. So these Amazon Go stores where you kind of literally walk in, you can pick up something and walk out. With that sort of convenience, again, retail is seeing a resurgence. Food halls are the things in retail that are also actually getting a lot of traction. People still want to, that's not something that you can kind of, give online. And so people still want to go out and eat, and that's a big attraction. So retail itself is changing, but I think it's very much about kind of class for retail.
In the, right after 1950 on up to the 70s, they built too many regional malls. There was just too many. And the reason they were able to build them was because they could get the money to build them. And in the 80s, in the early 80s, at the Urban Land Institute, I was on the retail council. And the council within the Urban Land Institute, on their conventions, they meet the day before. And the councils are fabulous. They have them for office buildings, apartments. And I was on the retail council. And they invited a speaker to come in. I forget who the speaker was, but I remember all the big retail shopping centers, Simon, O'Connor, all the biggest of the big were in that meeting. And the speaker came in and talked about how this thing, internet, how they were going to be able to shop over a thing and not have to go to the mall and have everything delivered to their house. And it would spell doomsday for the regional mall. They almost threw the guy out. I mean, they literally said, don't ever bring anyone like that back in here again. And he was dead on. I mean, he was 100% right. I wish I remembered who it was, because I'd like to talk to him. But he was 100% right. So, again, people want to go and be seen, particularly the young people, have coffee or whatever. But the other stuff they buy, do it on the internet.
Yep.
Do it in the middle of the night, early morning. It's great.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Great, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Very much. Thank you so much. Everybody want to ask secret questions? Can come up and ask secret questions.